Hey guys, as we wind down tonight, we gently slide into a world where central heating does not exist. Insulation is mostly wishful thinking, and your only defense against frostbite is a thin layer of sheep-based optimism. You're about to become a medieval peasant. Congratulations, you've peaked too early in life. It's winter. Not the cute kind with hot cocoa and Pinterest sweaters. The kind where your breath turns into icicles inside your nose. Your mattress is made of moldy straw that whispers fungal lullabies into your spine, and every gust of wind feels like a personal attack from the sky. There is no thermostat. There is no blanket unless you count that one itchy sackcloth that doubles as your Sunday best. There is, however, a cow. You will be sleeping next to it, and if you're lucky, it won't kick you during its midnight dreams. Your house, and we use the term loosely, is held together by mud, hope, and the ghosts of unfulfilled insulation promises. There's a fire sometimes, but it mostly makes smoke. The kind that lingers in your lungs, on your clothes, and in your marriage. Outside, the village is silent, blanketed in snow and existential despair. Inside, it's just you, your family, and the collective heat of shared suffering. Your only entertainment? Watching the frost form artistic patterns on the inside of your only window, which is actually just a hole in the wall covered with pig intestine. You might think, surely humans didn't survive like this. And yet, they did. Sort of. Enough of them made it through to keep the species going, mostly out of spite. So, before you settle in, feel free to give the video a like and hit subscribe if you're truly enjoying the journey. And hey, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I'm genuinely curious who else is awake right now, voluntarily immersing themselves in a nightmarish historical freezer. Because tonight, we won't just study winter. We'll crawl inside it, scratch at its walls, curl up next to its sour turnip breath and whisper, "Please don't kill me before morning." Now soften the glow, set a gentle breeze in motion, and let's drift into tonight's tale together. You wake up with your eyelids glued together like two slices of bread frozen shut with tears. Not because you cried, but because last night, the wind slipped through the hole in your roof with the assertiveness of a winter god who lacked both mercy and a sense of humor. The air inside the house isn't air anymore. It has shape, sharp edges, and slithers into your lungs like a slow, cold blade. You try to take a deep breath, only to find that it feels like sipping crushed ice flavored with cow dung and last night's kitchen ash. Every breath makes your chest wheeze, as if your organs are filing for paid leave. The blanket on your body, if one could call it a blanket, is a thick cloth, stiff as a half-burnt inn sign from 1293. Every time you turn over, it sounds like someone wringing out a wet wool sweater on a gravel path. You can't remember the last time you washed it, but you have a vague feeling that you still had all your teeth back then. The bed, or rather, the damp straw sack, is evolving its own ecosystem. Mushrooms, fleas, and something that faintly glows at night, which you've decided not to think about anymore. The straw is damp, rotting, and smells like a memory no one wants to recall. You meant to replace it last month, but life carried on without asking for your opinion. You don't want to get out of bed, but the irony is, staying means cold. Getting up also means cold. But at least, by standing, you might burn off the last few calories from last night's dinner. A turnip soup without turnips and a scrap of bread as dry as a whetstone. You put your feet on the ground and immediately regret it. The floor is cold like truth, like your wife's stare when you forget to fetch firewood, like a monk's curse after losing his porridge pot. You reach for the cloth shoes hanging near the hearth, hoping for warmth, but they've frozen stiff. Good for self-defense, not for walking. You shuffle toward the hearth. Last night's ashes remain, quiet, like proof of a life once lived. No fire, no coal, just gray dust, like a goodbye that never explained itself. You crouch down, trying to strike flint, your hands trembling from the cold, your lips pressed tight like whispering a silent curse. You know you have to be patient, or at least pretend, Because lighting a fire now is like confessing love to someone who's blocked you on every platform. When the first spark flies and catches on a piece of dry grass, you glimpse a fragile light, a flicker of hope as tiny as a lump of beef fat left in an old pot. But it dies. You try again, and again, and finally, a small shivering flame like a toddler learning to walk begins to burn. You sit there, exhaling, watching it like it's the eyes of a once biting dog that's now, perhaps, sorry. Then, as you sit there, hugging your shaking frame, you hear a sound outside. The wind. But not ordinary wind. It's the kind that hisses like the sigh of the winter god, whispering, "Today will be slightly worse than yesterday." You tell yourself, you're used to this. But the truth is, no one really gets used to the cold. People just learn to live with it, like living with a distant relative who crashed on your floor, never pays the electric bill, and never takes out the trash. In that moment, you're no longer a modern person stranded in the past. You are part of the village, of this decaying house, of history, a small, shivering creature that is still alive. And you know, if you can just keep this fire going, if you can make it through the morning, then you still have a chance to go on. To taste another bland porridge, to light another tired fire, to exist. And in the 14th century, that is the greatest victory one could hope for. And so you sit there, unmoving, not thinking deeply, simply existing, like a turnip shoved into reality waiting for something to happen. Maybe the sun, maybe death, maybe someone at the door announcing there's real soup today. But no one knocks in winter, unless they're bringing bad news or borrowing a snow-beating stick. Good news doesn't hike through a blizzard. That's a basic rule of the Middle Ages. You rise, or try to. Your joints respond slowly, like a mule debating whether to kick you. Your knees creak like a wooden door with rusted hinges. Your back, after a night on damp straw and dry dreams, now curves like a misshapen parenthesis. Every movement is measured by stifled groans and tiny bone clicks. But you move, not out of hope, but because staying still is colder. You wobble to the door and crack it open. The wind slaps your face like a furious goose getting revenge for its stolen eggs last spring. The scent outside is unclear, a blend of cold wind, damp smoke, and the absence of fresh meat. The village is still there. Silent houses, thatched roofs like the heads of old men napping in fields. No sounds, save for the wind hurling snow onto roofs and the deep sigh of cold, as if winter itself were a melancholic being regretting the invention of mankind. You look at the road, coated in frozen mud and horse dung, and feel a strange familiarity, like meeting an old classmate at a reunion no one wanted. A new day, another loop, and you, a creature with veins, awareness, and a mildly growling stomach, will enter it again. You exhale. A white cloud rises, curling like a question left unanswered. Maybe today you'll find dry wood. Maybe the fire will last until noon. Maybe someone will share a spoonful of lard. Or not. But you'll live. Not because you're strong, but because no one else can live in your place. You shut the door, return to your seat, place your hand on your knee, feeling warmth return like an old friend no longer mad at you. And in that quiet moment, you understand something. Surviving a winter night isn't a miracle. It's a habit. A kind of perseverance that smells like smoke, mildew, and crusty bread. And you, peasant of this century, just did it again. You stand there, half naked, shivering like a slab of meat hung in an abandoned market, staring at your one and only outfit. A pile of cloth slumped near the cold hearth like a creature that once had a soul, but has since chosen to retreat from the mortal world and focus on cultivating mold. It's a wool sweater of an indiscernible color. It may have once been brown or gray. Now it carries the hue of surrender. A dusty film of time draped over fibers rough as the chin hairs of an old woman who despises children. You pick it up. It emits a sound you've only heard once before, when you accidentally sat on a dead chicken, heavy, damp, and possessing the peculiar flexibility of a meatball forgotten in a boot. You sniff the collar lightly to check the smell. No need, the smell finds you first. It's the scent of 3 seasons: a summer of sweat, a fall of rain, and a winter of coughing. There's something of river water, something of sheep wool, and a hint of despair from a tailor who gave up halfway through his trade. You put it on. Left arm, right arm, head, and your pride, which gets pulled along for the ride. The sweater doesn't slide over you like silk. It scrapes across your skin as if you're trying to force your body through a sewer pipe braided from nettle roots. Every movement makes you itch. Not a mild itch, but the kind where fleas are hosting a grand convention under your armpits and handing out bite-sized souvenirs. Next comes the trousers. Same set, same fate. Burlap trousers, chosen not for comfort, but because no one could afford anything else. They're stitched with hemp and broken promises. The left leg bears a tear shaped like a map. The right has a patch resembling a duck's head. You've never figured out why. Perhaps a tailoring error. Or a bold fashion statement from a century that didn't know better. You bend down to put them on. And at that very moment it feels like you're inserting your leg into a cave full of hibernating bats. Every motion is an apology to your skin and a betrayal of your dignity. No socks. You've made peace with that. But every winter you still ask the same question. Might a miracle occur this year? Might a pair of rabbit fur socks appear beneath the bed? But no. It's still your bare feet, cracked, purple, and wrapped in scraps of cloth, like trying to patch a cathedral wall with chewing gum. You put on your shoes, wooden clogs hard as fate. They have no soles, no lining, no forgiveness. Each step produces a clop-clop, like a disaster warning drum, and every thud is a curse upon the carpenter who created this instrument of torment. Then the hat. You don't have a hat, you have an old sleeve. And you wrap it around your head like someone tying up a rice cake. Except there's no mung bean, no pork fat, just your ears, now beyond sensation. You glance at yourself in a piece of rusted metal you use as a mirror. A hunched figure, wrapped in too much cloth and too little hope. You resemble a soaked mop left to dry in an eastern wind. But at least, you're dressed. You step outside. The wind slaps your face like an auntie from a previous life who disapproved of you on principle. It seeps into your collar, then your armpits, then your soles, despite 3 layers of shirts, 2 pairs of pants, a scarf, a hat, and wooden clogs. You still feel as if you're standing naked in a snowy field, judged cell by cell by the wind itself. You hunch over, hands tucked deep into your sleeves like a child trying to hide from life's gaze. And then you spot your neighbor, Old Mary, wearing a cloak made from burlap, patched with pigskin, covering her from head to toe like a pig wrapped tightly to avoid freezing solid. She looks at you, doesn't smile, just nods faintly, as if saying, "Good, you're not dead yet." And you understand. That's the deepest form of empathy known to this era. Clothes don't keep you warm. Clothes just keep you from getting arrested for public indecency. And sometimes, if you're lucky, they stop you from freezing solid while waiting for spring. You keep walking. Each clop of your clogs echoes like a countdown until your toes fall off. But you walk anyway, because you're medieval. You were born to endure. To wrap yourself in things modern people only dare to view through museum glass, and say, how did people live like that? You sit by the fireplace. Though calling it a fireplace is just for convenience, in reality, it's just a hurried pile of stones in the center of the room, where ash gathers like a council of embers that have lost all will to live. There is no chimney, no exhaust system, no concept of ventilation. There is only smoke. And you. Each time you light a fire, it's a choice. Freeze to death or choke to death. And as usual, you choose choking, because at least dying in smoke is warm. You lean down, hands stiff as rice crackers left out in the dew, sifting through the ashes to nudge a coal still faintly glowing. A tiny spark flares up, like the guilty glance of an old friend who borrowed money and just remembered. You blow on it, gently, then harder, then forget that you're blowing directly into the ash. A hot dust cloud rises, invading your eyes, nose, and mouth like a fury sponsored entirely by your own stupidity. You cough, a little at first. Then again, rougher, with a sound like a hammer hitting dry straw. Then a whole series of coughs, as if your lungs have decided to escape your body piece by piece. Everyone in the house is used to it. The kids keep playing with a straw-stuffed chicken. Your mother continues spinning yarn. Your father flips the charred side of the bread like nothing's happening. Coughing is the background music of winter. If you're not coughing, it means you're dead. And if you're dead, they'll carry you outside, which is worse than staying inside the smoke, because out there it's so cold even the sky refuses to look down. The smoke rises, swirls under the low ceiling, and settles quietly where your hopes used to be. It doesn't drift away. It stays. Like negative emotions in a family conversation. You open the door, just a crack, to let the smoke out. And it does escape. But the cold comes in too. And that cold nullifies all your fire-starting efforts. So you close the door again. You choose to live with the smoke, like living with a roommate who wasn't invited, never bathes, and doesn't believe in personal space. Smoke clings to your hair, your clothes, your thoughts, until you no longer know where your scent ends and the scent of burnt wood or nameless sorrow begins. You step outside for a moment, and your neighbor nods. "Ah, you lit the fire early today." And you know they're not congratulating you. They're implying you smell like a heartbroken log that just went through thermal shock. A day without smoke is a day without fire. A day without fire is a day without existence. So you learn to live with it. Learn to see through that stingy haze to spot the iron pot suspended by a string you don't trust. Learn to eat dinner in a room that feels like a horror film shot in a smokehouse. Learn to find your spoon by testing the floor's temperature with your toes. Sometimes the smoke gets so thick you can't see the person across from you. You only hear their raspy breathing and guess who they are based on their cough patterns. Children, short, frequent coughs. The elderly, long, mournful hacks like unfinished sad songs. Grandma, one cough, then silence. A long silence. Everyone tenses. Then she coughs again. Surviving one more round. You've grown used to it. Your body has adapted. Your lungs could serve as portable air filters. Your eyes now sting constantly, not from emotion, just because they have no choice. And strangely, amidst the smoke, the scent of burning wood, the mildew, and the soft crackle of falling ash, you feel peace. Not the kind of peace found in untouched nature or deep meditation, but the tired kind, when you realize, well, at least, the fire's still going. And a burning fire means you haven't frozen to death. And not being frozen means you can sip another mouthful of turnip broth, thin as a heartbroken cow's tears. And that sip, though lukewarm, is proof that today is still happening. You sit back down, lean against the wooden wall, stare at the little flame, exhaling slowly through the smoke like a failed monk playing the role of a gym teacher. Everything still stings, still feels dim, still feels damp, but you're used to it. Because in this century, no one asks, "Does the house have a fireplace?" They ask, "Is anyone still alive in there?" If you're still breathing, still coughing, still able to hear this whisper, then congratulations, you're still here. And that, you know, is a small triumph amid the smoke and cold. When night falls like a filthy blanket someone throws over your shoulders without asking, you know it's time to return to your beloved bed, meaning a coarse sack stuffed with soggy straw, wedged between two damp wooden walls and a dining table held upright by an unnamed rock. This bed has no frame, no legs, no mattress, and no forgiveness. It just lies there, sagging in the middle like a betrayed hammock, gloomy and inert, like a cow that refuses to stand up because it knows it has to plow again tomorrow. You approach, bend down, Place your hand on the cloth and feel the moisture seep into your fingertips as though you were touching the palm of a corpse that just napped in the cellar. You sit down. The bed lets out that telltale crunch crunch, not of dry straw, but of straw that's been wet, then dry, then wet again 3 times. It feels like sitting on a termite mound undergoing internal reorganization. You're no longer surprised. Every night you lie down is a spiritual experience, not meditative, more like a delicate calculation between the least itchy spot and the warmest one, 2 things that rarely coincide. You lie on your side, then on your back, then the other side. Your back hits something odd, maybe a stick, maybe a vacationing mouse, maybe a piece of your soul you left behind last winter. Whatever it is, you don't check. In this century, some things are better left alone. You pull up the blanket, assuming blanket includes wool scraps stitched with hemp string, smelling like a wet dog that once lived well but has since given up. It's heavy, not from thickness but from dampness. You tuck it over yourself and immediately feel like a turnip buried in a cold well to preserve its spiritual essence. The straw rubs against your skin like a gentle reminder. You survive thanks to what others would burn. You sleep thanks to the leftovers of fields no one wants to remember. Each stalk is a rejection from nature, a soft chuckle from fate, a tiny tendon in the long lesson of humility. There's a sound in the straw, faint, but enough to let you know you're not alone. You don't see anything, but you know something's crawling. Maybe a flea, maybe a louse, maybe a worm that misread the invitation to come inside and play. Whatever it is, you don't react. In this house, everyone has a role. And that creature, at least, warms a corner of the foot of the bed. You draw your feet in, snuggling closer to the wall, not out of fear, but to avoid kicking someone, or something, also trying to sleep nearby. In winter, the distance between person, animal, and hope is as thin as a strip of fabric nibbled along the hem by mildew. You close your eyes, but instead of sleeping, your mind drifts. You recall last night's dream, where you lay on an actual mattress, with pillows, with sheets, and no need to scratch. In that dream, there were no rats, no coughing, no sensation of your back being jabbed by a rogue grain of rice determined to outlive all other straw. And then you woke up, realizing the softest part of that entire dream was you. On some nights, your whole family sleeps together, curled up in a tangled pile of people. Blankets divided by age, warmth distributed according to one's ability to stay silent. Anyone who coughs too much gets pushed to the edge. Anyone who wets the bed gets no second chances. Children sleep in the middle. Adults sleep on the outside. The cow, if you have one, sleeps against the wall, like a living fireplace that occasionally goes thump with character. And you, a wool-wrapped creature, with a sleeve for a hat, lying somewhere among body heat, sweat, and snoring. You just hope the night passes quickly. Not to get up and work, but to have one more day, even if it's a colder day, even if the smoke from the hearth burns thicker, even if someone spills porridge and you have to clean the bed again. You sigh. Your breath condenses on the inside of the blanket, rising like a pale mist of unmailed wishes. You know tomorrow holds nothing new. Still the same straw, still the same cold, still the same mysterious itch with a clear purpose but no clear source. But in the dampness, in the darkness, in the creaks of old wood and rotting cloth, you're still alive. And for a medieval soul, surviving the night is the ultimate victory. No need for deep sleep. Just waking up will do. You're still here. With straw, with blanket, with a mildly aching back. And somehow, that's enough. You just managed to doze off, having conquered the usual nightly enemies. Smoke, itchiness, back pain, and the sound of crickets nibbling straw beneath your pillow. When your body, a biology without empathy, sends out an alert from below the navel. A gentle twinge, not painful, not urgent, but undeniably real. like a knock on your door at midnight followed by a whisper. It's your bladder. We need to talk. You open your eyes. The ceiling's still there, the straw's still there, the cold is most definitely still there. Hope. Less certain. You try to ignore it, curling up tighter, legs tucked in like a loosely wrapped spring roll, and mutter prayers you know no night shift deity is available to hear. But it doesn't work. The pressure builds. Steady. Stubborn. Like a cow at milking time, you can delay, but it won't. You know you have no choice. No one does. Because in this century, there's no chamber pot, no indoor plumbing, only a rickety outhouse behind the chicken coop, where the wind whistles through the cracks as if reciting stories you never wanted to hear. No lights, no heat, no toilet paper, but plenty of snow, ice, and a hole, deep, black, and silent, waiting like someone who's bet their entire life just to watch you slip. You sit up gently, like someone trying not to awaken old regrets. Your hands reach for your coat, which is, in fact, an old feed sack, repurposed into a cold-weather garment through 2 seams and 3 whispered prayers. You throw it on, wrap a cloth around your head, slip into your wooden shoes, stiff as destiny and heavy as unresolved feelings, and step toward the door. The door swings open. Wind rushes in instantly, as though it too had business inside. The air is sharp as a blade, sliding through the gaps in your coat, shaving layers of skin like it's trying to carve your name into the hall of indecisive souls. Every step you take across the snow is a duel between "I'll be fine" and "I should have stayed in bed and dreamed this away." You don't turn on a light because there isn't one. You follow old footprints, faint outlines in the frozen slush from the last time you did this, and pray that no new surprises were added along the way. The darkness wraps around you like a massive blanket washed in doubt. Everything is silent, cold, and smells fateful. Then you arrive. The outhouse. A tiny wooden shack tilting to one side as if trying to flee its assigned duty. You push the door. It creaks, like a sigh from something that's seen too much. Inside is a hole. Nothing else. No candle. No window. No incense. No poetry. Just a void, in both the literal and emotional sense. You sit down, not on a seat. On a plank, so cold that when it meets your skin, you immediately begin to question the entire evolutionary journey of humanity. Your body curls inward, like a hedgehog forced into a seashell. You exhale deeply, not out of relief, but from thermal shock. And then, you do what you came to do. Each second is a test of will. You dare not look down, dare not think about where you're sitting, dare not ask whether anyone's ever fallen in. You just hope, clinging to a trembling, pitiful optimism, that everything goes quickly and smoothly and without rats. Finished, but not done. Because now comes the realization, there's no paper. You glance around, searching for a leaf, a scrap of cloth, a trace of mercy left behind by a kinder soul before you. Nothing. Just a stalk of dry grass and a little chunk of ice. You choose silence. Then stand, pull up your trousers, and step out. Like a warrior returning from a battle no one will ever mention. You make your way back to the house. The wind still howls. Your shoes still slip. But you walk faster. Not because of the cold, but because the sensation of "I survived" is racing through your bloodstream. You open the door. Smoke from the hearth hits your nose, and it's comforting. Not because it smells good, but because it doesn't smell like that. You remove your coat, unwrap your scarf, and crawl back into your straw bed, that damp, itchy, flea-infested nest. And it now feels like the embrace of an old friend. One who asks no questions, holds no grudges, and just welcomes you back after every regrettable decision. You lie down, exhale, curl up, close your eyes. The night continues. The wind still howls. the rats still run. And you, a fully functioning human being who just completed a deeply unpleasant yet profoundly survival-based mission, try once more to sleep. Not to rest, but to forget. Forget that you might have to do it all again, in just a few hours. Winter mornings don't arrive with light. They arrive with the sound of teeth clacking in despair. The coughs of old people blending with the long yawns of children too young to hate life, and that unmistakable scent of singed wool, a sign that someone tried to warm their hands over the fire and got too close. You wake up, or at least open your eyes in a numb fog that barely qualifies as consciousness. Your body is stiff like dried fish pressed in a salt barrel, each joint creaking like an old hinge, and when you stretch, it feels like you're snapping a loaf of bread, the kind baked with cold wind, flourless batter, and no trace of hope. Cold. So cold you begin to wonder whether you're still alive, or just reenacting a mummy's role for a festival no one actually organized. And, as always, your mind turns to the question everyone asks this time of day. How do I stay warm now? Of course you don't have a proper fireplace. What passes for fire in your house mostly exists to create smoke and burn through your patience. Firewood is as rare as kindness at a winter marketplace. Charcoal is as expensive as fake affection. And the idea of a heating system belongs in the same category as a meal with meat and a dreamless night's sleep. Folk tales at best. The first thing you think of is rocks, not fancy ones. Just round stones left near the fire to absorb heat, then cuddled in bed like prehistoric plush toys. The only problem is that rocks don't warn you when they're too hot. So if you hear a sizzling noise and smell burning under the blanket, it might not be your imagination. You once knew an old neighbor named Ulrich who used hot rocks for warmth for 15 winters, until one night, a stone cracked mid-slumber, launched from his hand, and landed directly in the broth pot. The family ate smoky stone soup for 2 days straight and vowed never to trust a rock again, unless it was for building a grave. If rocks are unreliable, the next choice is straw. Straw is plentiful. Straw is free. Straw doesn't ask hard financial questions. When you bury yourself in straw, the first sensation is warmth, the second is itchiness, and the third is something is crawling. But you live with it, because in this age, itchy is better than dead. You've tried stuffing straw into your sleeves, your pant legs, your scarf, even inside your hat, making your head look like an abandoned bird's nest with an optimistic twist. The villagers looked at you like you'd lost your mind. But you didn't care. You were alive. They were cold. That was enough of a victory, even if it meant becoming a winter scarecrow. Beyond straw, some households resort to lard. Yes, rubbing actual pig fat onto the skin like a medieval moisturizer. Slick, shiny, and a magnet for every cat within 200 meters. This method isn't recommended if you still have pride, or if you prefer not to be followed to market by half the village's dogs. But no one can deny, it works. You once saw a 7-year-old smeared in lard from head to toe, lying naked in the dead of winter, and surviving, though they couldn't go outside for a week because every speck of dust stuck to them like bad memories. The final and strangest method, hugging other people. That's right, not out of love, out of need. In a large family, when temperatures drop low enough for bones to start whispering, all personal boundaries are erased faster than secrets in a gossip circle. One person clings to another. Children nest inside their parents' shirts. Grandma becomes the central heating unit. And everyone silently agrees to forget the smells, the snoring, the breath that smells like turnip gruel, so long as they survive. You remember once when 3 families crammed into one hut. Everyone was assigned a position in a 3-tiered meat heater configuration. One person's back was another's pillow. Your arm went under someone's head. And when someone asked, "Whose foot is on my face?" the only possible answer was, "Doesn't matter. It's warm." You sit now, back against the wall, arms wrapped around a stone that's gone cold, like your faith in true love. And you wonder, why am I still here? Why do humans live in places so cold that tears freeze mid-air and fall into other people's eyes like icy knives? And the answer, simple as boiled turnip, because there's nowhere else to go. And when you bury yourself in straw again, crawl under the blanket, press your back to the damp wall, you realize warmth isn't a state. It's a shape made of patience. It's the innocent belief that if you lie still long enough, the cold might forget you exist. A medieval morning doesn't begin with an alarm clock. There's no scent of roasted coffee, and certainly no one whispering, "Wake up, love, I made you toast." No, mornings here begin with your stomach growling like an unauthorized percussion band performing inside your chest. Then come the sounds of someone stomping on straw, a spoon clinking against an empty pot, and the wind whistling through the wall slats like a gentle reminder that today will be colder than yesterday, in the least gentle way possible. You sit up. Sleep still clings to your eyelids like soot that refuses to leave the pot, but your stomach has already begun to protest like a starving monarch displeased with its peasants. You peel yourself from the straw heap and shuffle to the dining table, which is actually a warped slab of wood balanced only by a single brick jammed under one leg, where breakfast awaits you, in silence. You look down. A hunk of bread, hard, cold, gray. So dense that even light, upon striking it, decides to turn around. You've seen it before. Maybe yesterday. Maybe the day before. Possibly last week. In this world, bread doesn't go bad. It transitions. From food to blunt object. If you threw it out the window, there's a non-zero chance you'd fracture someone's collarbone. But you won't throw it. Because it's breakfast, you pick it up. It's heavier than it looks. The surface is as rough as cobblestone, with cracks resembling maps of ancient deserts. You try to break it, you fail. You try cutting it, the knife slides off. You try slamming it on the table, it bounces. Finally, you decide you'll bite. The crunch sounds like someone hammering bricks. Your teeth hit the crust like wagon wheels hitting a stone. They jolt, rattle, and throb. You're not sure if you're eating or conducting a durability test on your jaw. Every chew releases a fragment of your childhood through the gaps in your gums. Once, you actually lost a tooth during breakfast. Your mother didn't scold you. She just nodded, handed you a cloth to wrap your cheek, and said, "Keep eating. There are still 3 more pieces." And so you did. Because in these times, skipping a meal isn't an option. It's a personal betrayal. Bread is sometimes served with water, if you're lucky. If not, you chew it dry, and dry chewing is an art. It requires stamina, patience, and faith in your throat. Some people suck on the bread like ice cubes, waiting for it to soften. Others rub it with salt to ease the descent. You've seen someone pour turnip broth over it for moisture, but it only made the bread both hard and sour, a combination born of hunger and a complete collapse of culinary judgment. You glance around, everyone's eating in silence. Not because breakfast is sacred, but because if you open your mouth mid-chew, a crumb might shoot into someone's eye. Or worse, you might cough, choke, and have to pause while you hack up last night's fireplace smoke still lodged in your lungs. Grandmother doesn't chew anymore. She just dips her bread in hot water and holds it in her mouth. The children gnaw it like cats biting shoes. Your father bangs the bread on the table before taking a bite, partly to test its integrity, partly out of habit formed through years of trauma from time-worn loaves. You make it halfway through your chunk, not because you're full, but because your jaw has started to tremble. One side of your face begins to twitch, as if your brain is debating whether to file a lawsuit against your body for abuse. You force down the final bit. It's dry, like a loan rejection, but you swallow, and wash it down with a sip of water, ice cold, tasting of burnt wood with a few brownish specks floating inside. Sometimes breakfast includes something called a side dish. Usually this is a piece of old cheese, soft in the wrong places, colored in ways that suggest it's exploring new evolutionary stages. Some say it helps make the bread go down easier. Others bit into the mold and were bedridden for 3 days. Either way, it's considered flavor. You've dreamed of other breakfasts. Something warm, soft, with a smell. Someone pouring you milk, handing you a clean wooden spoon, asking if you slept well. Then you woke up, holding your bread chunk, which slipped from your hand and hit the ground with a dull thud like an answer. Breakfast ends the same way it begins, in silence, slow chewing, and a bit of disappointment folded into the creases of everyone's forehead. People stand, someone collects crumbs. Someone lifts the pot lid, hoping for burnt porridge stuck at the bottom. You sit a bit longer, stare at the remaining chunk of bread and think, you'll eat that tomorrow, because that's all there is. And then you exhale. You stand. Your teeth are still there. Your stomach, maybe. But you've had breakfast. You did your part. You survived a brick of baked flour. And in the long story of humanity, that's a kind of victory modern people will never understand. After a breakfast of gravel mixed with survival instinct, you stand up, readjust your coat, which used to be a feed sack, and look out the window. A hole in the wall covered with fabric thinner than faith in the next generation. And you see exactly what you already knew before opening your eyes. Today will be cold again, windy again, and that same shovel will be waiting, like an old friend who never learned to talk, but always shows up exactly when you don't want them to. Labor is part of life, not in the follow your passion sense, but in the if you don't do it, no one will dig the ground, chop the wood, or chase the chickens out of the outhouse sense. In winter, labor doesn't make you sweat, it makes you cry. Every task is a psychological battle. Every tool, a quiet reminder of how replaceable your wrist bones really are. You pick up the shovel. Your hands are so cold they've stopped sending signals. It's like gripping a dead fish reincarnated as metal. You step outside. The wind slaps your face like the universe asking, "What do you think you're doing?" You don't respond. You just lower your head, walk to the garden, and start digging. Why dig in winter? No one really knows. Maybe to prepare for spring onions, maybe to bury a rat, maybe just to stay warm. But you dig anyway. Every swing of the shovel is met with resistance. The frozen earth refuses. Rocks leap up. The blade bounces. Your spine twinges as if it just read the script for today and disagrees. You continue, because no one else will. In the village, everyone has a job. Someone's gathering firewood, which means going into the forest, looking around, picking up a broken branch, slipping on ice, and returning with a few wet twigs and a lesson in humility. Others break stones, the kind once used to build houses, now used to block wind, and soon possibly used as bread if things get worse. You pant, not from exhaustion, but because the cold air makes your lungs rebel. You remember when your cousin coughed during firewood duty and the fit lasted so long, people thought she was chanting scripture. She never coughed in public again. Since then, your family's adopted an unwritten rule. When working, don't breathe deeply, don't cough. And never trust your left arm. You switch to chopping wood. But this isn't that neat, pine-scented firewood you see in romantic paintings. It's knobby, damp, moldy chunks of tree that might have something still living inside. You place one on the stump, lift your axe, the blade slightly chipped, the handles slightly loose, and your soul is entirely unprepared. The first swing misses, the second hits the side, the third buries the blade, but the wood stays intact. You sit down, stare at the log, and sigh, like someone trying to end a relationship both sides are bored of, but no one has the energy to leave. You try again, and this time, miraculously, the wood splits. You feel a strange warmth in your chest. Then you notice your hand is bleeding. You're not sure which caused the warmth. People say, labor is glorious. Here, labor is misaligned knuckles, 3-day backaches, wet boots from melted frost, and pants so mud-caked you can't tell where the fabric ends, the earth begins, or your pride got lost. But you work anyway, not because you enjoy it, but because if you don't, there will be no firewood, no tilled soil, nothing to eat, and nothing to talk about. And you need that last one, the story. Because if you can't have a full meal, you can at least have a long tale. You work until noon. The sun never shows, but time passes. Your hands go numb, your nose turns red, and someone calls you in for lunch. Not because they miss you, but because they need you to wash up, light the fire, or at least stop lying face down in the garden like a forgotten log. You return to the house. Your hands are swollen, your back is slightly crooked. Your pants have a rip on the left cheek, but you smile, a smile no one sees, and maybe even you don't realize you're doing it. But something feels warm in your chest, maybe from the 3 hours of constant motion, or maybe just the joy of no one getting injured today, including you. And you understand something small. In this place, working isn't a blessing, but surviving a day of work most definitely is. A winter afternoon doesn't arrive with golden lights streaming through the window like those romantic scenes on modern wall calendars. It arrives with the shadow of a cow lumbering toward the barn, her gaze distant, as if she's seen the full tragedy of mankind and still hasn't forgiven you for that failed back scratch last year. You know it's milking time. A task that resembles a quiet conversation between man and an animal who both nourishes you and, if in a bad mood, might end your bloodline. And today's cow, well, doesn't seem thrilled. Her back curves slightly, her tail flicks rhythmically, and her eyes lock on you with the kind of look that says, "Did you just ask me to sing folk songs at a festival?" You grab the bucket, not the shiny, stainless steel kind from dairy ads. This one's a battered tin pail, dented in 3 places and scented in ways words shouldn't attempt. You rinse it with rainwater mixed with optimism. Then you approach the cow, whispering a silent prayer. Not for abundant milk, just that she doesn't kick. You sit down, one leg forward, one back, body tilted just right, hands ready. You place your palms gently on her udder like an ancient pianist preparing to perform a composition no one wants to hear. You squeeze. Nothing. You squeeze again. A tiny squirt. A feeble stream of milk arcs out like a child's tear discovering lunch is yesterday's bread again. The cow exhales deeply. A sign. Maybe she's relaxing. Maybe she's about to lose it. You're not sure. You continue anyway. Steady, rhythmic, your patience saint-like but slightly nervous, as if you were a monk trapped in a chicken coop. And then, wham! A hind leg swings. It misses, but barely. Just enough to remind you that health insurance does not exist. You retreat, not because you're scared, but because you value your skeletal alignment. The cow chews, not fresh grass, last autumn's hay. You both know she hates it, but you're not enjoying this either. Neither party is satisfied, yet here you are, the foundation of every lasting relationship. You try again, gentler this time, as if apologizing. The cow doesn't react. A flicker of hope. You pick up the pace. Milk begins to flow. Droplets fall into the bucket with soft ting-ting sounds, like a humble alarm for those wise enough to know there might be porridge today. Suddenly, a cold breeze slips through the barn wall. You shiver. So does the cow. She turns her head and glares at you. Displeased. You consider speaking soothingly. Then remember she doesn't speak human. You smile awkwardly and keep milking, careful not to meet her gaze. Everyone knows, if you stare into a cow's eyes too long, you'll see yourself, and realize you have no escape. The bucket fills a third of the way. You feel relief, but you don't celebrate. Partly because the cow still has 3 active limbs. Partly because your mother might reject the milk for tasting anxious. You focus. You breathe. You keep going. And then it happens. The worst thing. The cow passes gas. Not loudly, but very close. And very real. You pause. Blink. No one prepared you for this. No book explains how to maintain composure when your face is inches away from the epicenter of an agricultural truth. You inhale. Mistake. But you keep milking. Because you are a peasant. And peasants don't quit over smells. After half an hour you rise, your back aching, arms sore, and face sagging like a wet quilt. You carry the bucket inside like a warrior returning from battle. Everyone looks at you. No one speaks, but they see. You did it. There's milk, no blood, no tears. At least none that reach the floor. You pour the milk into a pot. Your grandmother tastes it. She nods. A rare signal, like sunshine peeking through fog. You feel you've accomplished something, not just bringing back milk, but surviving an afternoon in which your primary business partner was a four-legged beast, 3 times your weight, fully capable of destroying you with a single misjudged tail flick. And when night falls, you sit by the fire, hands around a cup of warm milk, feeling heat spread from your palms to your cheeks to your chest, where gratitude and exhaustion quietly cohabitate like 2 roommates who no longer speak. You take a sip. It tastes of hay, smoke, cold wind, and something unnamed. Maybe it's pride. Maybe it's sciatic nerve inflammation. Night. Outside, the wind howls through every gap in the wall like a choir of breathless monks, off-key but deeply committed. Each gust whispers lullabies from winter, reminding you that sleep is a seductive option, but staying awake might still be wise. The family is huddled under straw, bundled up like mystery-filled rice rolls, snoring in waves like ceremonial drums, except their ancestors probably couldn't handle Uncle's foot odor from the corner bed. You sit by the hearth, back against the wall, eyes heavy like ash-soaked stones. In your hand, a long stick, used to stir the coals, or, as it's more accurately called, anti-nap equipment. Tonight is your turn to keep the fire. A rotating honor passed around like a low-level curse among children old enough to have responsibilities, but not quite old enough to protest them effectively. The task sounds simple on paper. Watch the fire, add wood if it dies, tamp it down with husks if it flares up, and if you hear a hiss, don't panic. It's the stove talking to the air, not the house catching fire. In practice, though, firekeeping is like babysitting a cat on hallucinogens. Never trust it, never ignore it, and never assume it's safe, just because it seems calm when you look away. You stare at the glowing coals, quietly wishing you could lay your head on the ashes and wake up in the future, in a house with central heating, where the only thing you have to monitor is the pizza timer. But you don't live there. You live here, where fire is your friend, your enemy, your lifeline, your hazard, and the reason everyone's lost their left eyebrow at least once. You feed in another stick. It's not dry. It sizzles like it's shedding a skin, then coughs out smoke like a teenage dragon with sinusitis. The smoke clings to your face. Your eyes sting. Your nose runs. You wipe your face with your sleeve and catch a smear of ash, tears, and whatever pride you had left from that one time you thought you might grow up to be a musician instead of the designated Ember Guardian. You start to drift, not out of sleepiness. Your eyes just don't want to cooperate. Everything blurs, like reading a bad poem you're not allowed to criticize. You see yourself in a sunlit field. No, wait. It's just the firelight bouncing off a dented copper pot. You shake your head. Stay awake. Anyone who falls asleep on fire watch gets mentioned at breakfast like a war criminal. You've heard the tale of your cousin who nodded off once and nearly roasted a live chicken sleeping under the table. You poke the fire. Ash flutters. You cough once. Then again. The sound echoes into the night like a siren. Either someone's working or dying. No one wakes. Good. That means the fire's stable. That means you haven't ruined the only thing keeping everyone from turning into medieval popsicles. Outside, the wind keeps howling. The sliding door creaks, whispering ancient regrets no one asked to hear. You listen, not for the poetry of it, but to confirm it's not the sound of fire catching on wood. Your nerves simmer like a pot left on low heat, never boiling, never cold, ready to spill over at the slightest spark or lapse. Occasionally you stand and walk a circle around the hearth. Not because it helps, but because sitting still means sleep. Sleep means fire. Fire means trouble. Trouble means yelling. The sacred order of all rural disasters. You lift a log, weigh its worth. Add it or save it. Firewood is currency. It warms the house, tempts thieves, and can sometimes be traded for 2 eggs and a sob story. You sit back down, exhale. The air is warm, your eyes burn, your hands are black with soot. You realize fire watching isn't just about fire. It's about holding on to the last flicker of warmth in this world, protecting a little glow before it disappears into ash and resignation. And you, a sore-backed, bleary-eyed figure wrapped in 3 layers of cloth and 2 layers of doubt, are the one chosen for tonight. You're no hero, but you're the last one awake. And in the frozen dark, that's worth as much as a knight guarding the gates of a castle. And when morning comes, not with sunlight, but with a rooster's uncertain attempt at crowing, you exhale one long breath. You look at the glowing embers still alive, and know you did it. No fire, no frostbite, no accidental chicken BBQ. You stand, eyes red, nose dripping. Your hand still clutches the coal-poking stick like a sacred staff of short-term consciousness, and you go to sleep, curl into the straw. Whisper to yourself, the fire's still burning. The next morning, if you can call it morning after sleeping barely 2 hours post-smoke-filled fire watch, begins with your mother calling your name. Not too loud, not too soft, but with the exact tone of a wooden spoon striking your self-worth. Steady, firm, and absolutely non-negotiable. You open your eyes. Your face still smells of ash, your body still of cow, and your soul feels like a rag left soaking overnight and forgotten in the frost. You already know what's coming. A legendary assignment, a ritual purification of the flesh via cold immersion and gravity warfare. It's called, quite plainly, hauling water. No faucets to turn, no plumbing. Just a stream, roughly half a lifetime's walk from your house, with water cold enough to resurrect the dead. And you, a barely functioning peasant soldier, have been chosen to bring back 2 full buckets of it. Enough to wash faces, boil greens, heat the stove, and, if any remains, rinse off whoever fell in the mud that morning. You strap on your shoes, splintered wooden clogs that clop with every step like despair being pounded into cobblestone. You throw on your coat, thicker than a tattoo but thinner than your neighbor's apologies. Then you grab the carrying pole, a bent old bamboo stick, curved like destiny, with 2 buckets, one with a hole in the bottom, and the other tilted left as if dodging gravity out of protest. You walk. The morning wind is cold, sharp like a polite rejection, but with the faint smell of baked goods. Frost clings to your eyebrows like salt to an open wound, and every breath is a tiny explosion inside your lungs. The road to the stream is not long, not short, just long enough to question the meaning of impermanence, the definition of harsh weather, and whether you remembered gloves. You didn't, obviously. At the stream, you lean down. Your eyes meet the water. Except, it's not flowing, it's frozen. A thin sheet of ice coats the surface like cold glass sarcasm. You tap it with a stick. The sound rings out like a funeral bell. You tap again. Crack. A piece falls in with a mocking plop. You start scooping. It's not easy. The water is freezing. The buckets are dented. Your hands are shaking. And you try convincing yourself that the odd smell is from river moss, not some bloated creature floating upstream since last market day. But you manage. You fill both buckets. Your eyes sting. Your nose burns. Your soul fractures a little, like the ice you just smashed. You head home. The yoke bows. Your shoulders creak like haunted hinges. Every step is both a physics challenge and a spiritual reckoning. The water sloshes, spills, chills your clothes, slides down your neck. And all you can do is tilt your head to the sky in silence. Because if you open your mouth, your teeth might stage a walkout in protest. You push on, against the wind, over rocks, through mud. Someone calls your name in the distance, not to help, just to ask if the water's coming. You don't respond, you just think, water is a flexible concept. It might be ice, might be tears. Sometimes it's just liquid determination. Halfway home, one bucket starts leaking. You hear the drip, drip, drip. So clear, so rhythmic, like a countdown to the moment your mother discovers there's not enough water to cook porridge. You clench your jaw, Stay balanced. Pray you don't slip, because if you fall, you'll get wet. If you get wet, you'll freeze. If you freeze, you'll get sick. And if you get sick, you'll still have to haul water. Just with more coughing. Finally, you reach home. Your pants are soaked. Your shoes are muddy. Your hat fell off 10 minutes ago. Your hands look like boiled shrimp. You set the buckets down. Your mother glances over. She nods. No praise. No smile. But you know, that's love. The quiet kind that means you won't be assigned to scrub pig feet today. You sit. Not because you want to. Your knees simply collapse as part of an emergency protocol. You look at the buckets. They're still mostly full. Sure, there's silt, some grass, a few tiny unnamed creatures, but it's water, and you brought it back. As you warm your hands over the fire, a slow glow spreads through you, the humble pride of someone who's completed a task that most modern people would call the police over if forced to do. And you wonder, if I have to do this again tomorrow, will I survive? You're not sure, but you know one thing, you'll go. One day in winter, when the smell from your coat becomes unbearable, not just to people but to rats as well, and the straw in your shoes transforms from insulation to a soggy foot soup, you know, it's time to do laundry. Not to get things clean, mind you, just clean enough that your family stops wincing when you walk past, and you can turn your head without nearly fainting from your own aroma. Winter laundry isn't an action, it's a ritual. A kind of self-inflicted monastic suffering, where cold, water, and filth come together to form a toxic aesthetic. Every drop of water is a slap in the face, every motion a sentence, and every hope curls up beside the wash basin like a cat that knows it's about to get wet. You carry the basin outside. There's no fragrant detergent, no hot water, no soft brushes, no cheerful jingles in the background. Just a cracked bar of earth-brown soap. It smells faintly of rotting wood mixed with pig fat, referred to as artisanal soap, though you call it a cleansing popsicle of questionable intent. You pour water into the basin, bucket after bucket from the stream that morning, still as cold as a mother-in-law's stare in folklore. It hits the bottom with a splish-splish that sounds like logic getting slapped in the face. You dip your hands in, yank them back, try again, yank again. The third time, you keep them in, not out of bravery, but because your nerves have stopped sending messages. You toss in the coat. It sinks like a romantic subplot crushed by financial reality. Bubbles rise, not from soap, from filth, from ancient microbes that took up residence in the cuffs. You start scrubbing, not gently, like silk, brutally, like squeezing the life out of a treacherous memory. The coat resists. It refuses to release its scent, like a liar clinging to secrets. You wring it once, twice, 4 times. Your back aches, your hands go numb, your nose runs, and you begin to wonder, did anyone, at any point in history, invent something to do this for people? You glance at the water. It's murky, black, skimming with grease. A few tiny creatures swim in circles, likely rethinking their life choices. You consider changing the water, then don't. You shut your eyes, wring out the coat, and plunge it into another bucket to rinse, meaning you dunk it into a second freezing nightmare, the aquatic sequel to the trauma you just survived. You wash it all. Coats, trousers, towels, socks, everything that's touched human or animal skin in the last 7 days. Then you take it all out to dry. No dryer, no warm breeze, just a trembling clothesline and sunshine as rare as kindness in a fairy tale without fairies. You hang each item like mourning banners for dryness. They sway in the wind, not like the soft flutter of silk in an ad, but like exhausted groans flapping in a wind that doesn't care. You know they won't dry today. Maybe not even this week. But you hang them anyway, because no one wants to wear damp laundry that smells like effort and defeat. You stand there, hands cold, back stiff, shirt wet. Wind whistles down your collar and into your bones. You feel like a leafless tree in winter, standing only to prove you still have roots. Once you hung your pants too close to the fire. They dried, also burned, right in the worst possible spot. Since then, you've hung things farther from the flames. Now they only singe at the corners. Progress. You remember what your grandmother said when you were a child. Winter laundry separates the strong from the wise. The strong wash. The wise wait until spring. She belonged to a third group, the delegation experts. She gave her laundry to someone else. You don't have that luxury. So you finish. Return inside with hands purple, face covered in lint, and a quiet sense that something has been washed. Your mother looks out the door at the wet, waving cloth like flags from a nation under siege by weather. She nods, says nothing, but you understand. She's pleased. Or at least not displeased enough to assign you to pigfoot washing duty. You sit, not because you want to, because your knees folded in self-defense. You look at your hands, still attached, barely. You sip warm water. Your throat thanks you. Your eyes sting. Could be the smoke. Could be the realization that you've just survived what monks might consider level 3 internal training. And as you watch the old coat, still dripping, still heavy with responsibility, sway gently in the wind, you understand something else. You'll be wearing it again in a few days, while it's still damp, still scented with soap, old sweat, and unkillable determination. And you'll smile. Not much. Just a small twitch of the mouth. Like spring wind that hasn't quite arrived. There comes a point in winter when you must accept that a tear is no longer an accident. It's a way of life. A coat ripped at the shoulder, pants torn at the rear, gloves split at the thumb crease. These no longer surprise you. They arrive with silent regularity, like the pop of a joint every time you sneeze wrong, or the nightly coughs of your neighbor, which sounds suspiciously like he's reenacting the Black Death of 1348. And when you glance at the last pair of pants still legally qualifying as clothing, only to see a slit running from your thigh straight to your dignity, you know. Today is a mending day. You pull out the old sewing box, a family heirloom of sorts, stuffed with thread in colors that match nothing. Bent needles, broken needles, headless needles, and a pair of scissors so dull they'd lose a fight with soft bread. There's a patch of cloth that once belonged to someone's shirt, though no one remembers who. It fits. More importantly, it doesn't smell. You lay the pants on the floor. The hole gapes like a mouth screaming for justice. You bend down, hands trembling with the needle, thread still unthreaded, and quietly wonder why no one has invented self-healing fabric. Or better yet, a life that doesn't require pants. But you don't have a choice. You bow your head to the task. Threading the needle, a basic act if you live in the 21st century with LED lighting, warm hands, and glasses that match your prescription. But you don't. You sit by the dim glow of a charcoal stove, eyes tired like an oil lamp at the end of its wick, hands trembling like a sparrow caught in the rain, and the needle, smaller than its own reason for existence. After 15 attempts, the thread finally slips through the eye, a quiet victory. You smile like you've rediscovered fire. You begin to stitch. The first line, crooked. The second, worse. The third pierces your own finger. You don't scream. You just look at the blood, pull the needle out, lick the wound, and keep going, like a soldier who knows they can't fall, because there's no one left to replace them. Stitch by stitch, jagged and lopsided, crooked as your life, loose here, tight there like your midnight emotions, but the cloth begins to hold. It looks like a map of a fictional kingdom recently ravaged by 3 civil wars and 1 wooden spoon invasion. But still, it holds. You move on to the coat, the armpit zone, a sensitive region. Wounded often, thanked rarely. The fabric there usually tears from sweat, erratic movement, or emotional instability. You sew carefully, trying not to let the needle wander. No small feat when your hands no longer feel like yours, moving only on survival instinct. You try the clothes on. The pants are tighter than usual. You probably sewed the 2 seams 3 centimeters too close together. The coat bulges slightly at the left shoulder, but you can stand. You can walk. No tearing sounds. Success. You examine the stitches. Uneven, ugly, unartistic, but they are yours. The result of effort, perseverance, and a little blood. They're not perfect, but they're enough. And in this world, enough is closer to happiness than anything else. You remember when your grandmother patched your grandfather's coat? She used a glaring red patch on a background of muddy brown. Everyone laughed. She didn't. She said, "If it can be mended, it's worth keeping." And he wore that coat through 4 winters, not for the warmth, but because it was his only way of saying thank you without speaking. You fold the clothes, put away the needles, roll up the thread, blow dust from the table, then sit. Your hands still numb, eyes still stinging, but you feel lighter, because you saved a piece of fabric, preserved a function, held on to something so you wouldn't have to start again, from scratch or from the rear. You glance at the closed sewing box, now resting quietly by the stove like an old friend who has nothing left to say. And you realize, throughout this long winter, it wasn't turnips or straw blankets or the fire that kept you going. It was the tiny needle, the one that stabbed your fingers more than 3 times but never made you quit. There are nights so cold the fire won't light, words freeze mid-air, and even belief curls into the corner of the room. And yet a single crooked stitch, closing a tear in an old sleeve, can make you feel like you're still taking care of what remains, not mourning what's lost. And that, in this era, is a quiet triumph, enough to make a poor, cold, hungry person smile faintly as they slip into an old coat and continue living. And when night falls, wind whistling through the cracks, you lie there in your freshly mended shirt, wearing the pants you just saved, feeling as if you're being held by your own persistence. You exhale, smile, and think, tomorrow, I'll probably need to mend more. But it's okay. I still have thread. I still have needles. And, most importantly, I still have me. You know lunchtime is near not because a bell rings, but because your stomach starts performing a symphony for an audience that doesn't exist. It gurgles with hope, rumbles with despair, and finally lapses into a dangerous silence. A silence that says, if you don't put something in soon, I'll start digesting internal organs instead. You stand up, not out of joy, but because it's your turn to cook. And here, cooking isn't about choosing what you feel like. It's the art of arranging scarcity in the least terrifying way possible. A withered onion, a moldy clove of garlic, half a turnip, scraped clean 3 times already, and something unidentifiable that you just hope isn't leftovers from last week. You look at the ingredients, a weird mix of food and fossils, then glance at the pot, then out the window, as if hoping for a messenger from the county market to arrive with a miracle. Or at least a sausage. But no one comes, just the wind, and the turnip. You start the fire. Yesterday's coals are cold, the ash still silently judging you. You blow. Nothing. You blow harder. It lights into your face. You cough. You hiss like an offended cat. Then you blow again, this time with the desperate technique of someone relearning how to keep fire alive in a world that has stopped believing in it. Finally, the flames rise, small and shaky, like dignity during tax season. You put the pot on. There's no oil, just congealed fat, a clump of pale white substance that looks like an unspoken apology. You scrape off a bit, toss it in, and it sizzles like a chemical reaction nobody dares explain. You start chopping. The knife is dull, the turnip is fibrous, the onion is slippery, like an unkept promise. The garlic is so tiny that when you finish peeling it, you're not sure if it's garlic or a pleasantly scented dust speck. You throw everything in. They sizzle and crackle like a theater troupe protesting being cooked together. You stir. The broth foams and turns an indistinct brown, the color of unhappy memories. You taste it. Salty. You add water. Bland. You add salt. Bitter. You sigh and toss in more turnip. It doesn't solve anything, but at least it floats, looking busy. You keep cooking. The smell fills the room, not good, not bad, just there, a scent of reality. The kind of smell that reminds you you're still alive, and the meal is still happening. You stir some more, waiting for a miracle. There is no miracle, only smoke. You rummage through the corner of the kitchen. You find a piece of carrot as dry as your mood. A pinch of dried greens that used to be lettuce, now just memories. You dump it all in, like a chess player out of pieces, flipping the board to change the game. When the dish has reached the state of unimprovable without divine intervention, you ladle it into bowls. Everyone gathers. No one speaks. Partly because there's nothing to say, partly because saying anything might ruin the already fragile appetite. People eat, slowly. They look at each other, nod, and no one complains. Not because it's good, but because no one wants you to cry while still holding the wooden ladle. You eat your share. The turnip is soft, the onion dissolves. The fat lingers, but deep inside is something quietly warm. Not the food, but the feeling that you tried. You cooked. You didn't pour the stew onto the chicken. You didn't incite panic. And you survived another meal. You washed the pot, under water cold enough to count as rejection. You scrub away food, failure, and expectation. You place the pot on the rack, exhale deeply and tell yourself, tomorrow will taste better. Not because the ingredients will improve, but because hope is stubborn. You wash your hands in the same cold water. Your hands, smoky, greasy, salted, sticky with existence. You glance at the kitchen shelf and spot one more onion. You save it, because tomorrow it could be the main dish, or part of one, or a physical metaphor for hope in root form. And as you sit by the hearth, watching the embers fade, listening to your now silent belly, you realize that cooking in this age isn't about making something delicious. It's about making something bearable. A little water, a little root, a little endurance. That's all it takes to call it lunch. You don't quite remember when wind became a creature with personality. It's no longer just air moving from high pressure to low like the books say, but a petty, sly, and gossip-loving thing, always slipping through the smallest cracks in your home, patting the back of your neck just as you fall asleep, and whispering in your ear, "It gets colder than this, sweetheart." Your house, if one dares call it that, is an uncertain collection of cracked wood, flaking clay, and faith that's barely survived 3 rainy seasons. The north wall, once patched with a hopeful blend of mud, dry grass, and the solemn promise that this time no leaks, now leaks. Not much, but consistently. A small gap just beneath the thatched roof lets wind through like an uninvited guest with an impeccable sense of timing. You crawl out from under your blanket, not because you're warm, but because it's too cold to keep lying still. You fumble toward the corner where your wall mending kit lives. It's an old bamboo basket filled with items no one thought would be useful. A torn triangle of burlap, a piece of goat leather dried since last harvest, and a rope once used to hang sausages, now used to hang belief. You look up at the drafty gap. It's small but sharp, like a relative's passive-aggressive remark. You stuff the cloth into it, hammer it in using a rusty nail and a rock because the hammer's handle snapped back in August. Your hands tremble as you work. And you wonder, is anyone else in the world doing this right now? Somewhere out there, is someone else plugging holes in a wall with straw pillows? Once the crack is sealed, you sit back. But the wind has already found another path through another wall. It doesn't leave. It simply reroutes. You sigh and look for thicker cloth. This time, a piece of an old coat. You remember it belonged to your neighbor, the one who left last winter in search of a place without turnips. He hasn't come back. Maybe he found paradise. Maybe he found more turnips. You tie the fabric to the wall with hemp string. The wall doesn't protest. The wind pauses, strangely and temporarily, as if watching you, planning its next move. You stand, look around. Everything is patched, yet the cold remains. It's no longer just outside. It lives in the knowledge that tomorrow will be the same as today, and today is identical to 3 days ago, except with fewer turnips and fewer words spoken in the house. You decide to sew a pouch. Not for food, there is none. Not for money, no one uses coins on turnips. But for the unnameable things. A scrap of cloth still scented with wood smoke. A small heart-shaped stone your sibling found by the stream. An old button from your father's coat. The one that fell off the day he left to pay taxes and never returned. You stitch it together, line by uneven line. Not beautiful, but strong. You don't need beauty. You need something that can hold what little you have left that still matters. Maybe it's the wooden spoon your mother used in her youth. Maybe it's the letter you never sent. Maybe it's a dream you had before you understood turnips. You finish the pouch, crooked seams, knotted edges. Each stitch is a sigh. Each knot, a quiet surrender. But in the end, you have a pouch, something no one else would look at twice. But you know, it holds what's left after everything else has been broken, rotted, or traded for salt. You wear it. It's light, but warm. Not because of the fabric, but because of what's inside. A fragment of yourself. You walk a lap around the house. The wind still howls. The cold still creeps. But it feels like you've reclaimed a tiny piece of land from winter. Not much, not heroic, but just enough to sit down, hold a bowl of thin porridge, and not feel like you're melting into an unfinished dream. And when night falls, black as ink, though not dark enough to hide the cold that seeps into the soul, you lie down, listening to the wind brushing past the roof like whispers from generations who once lived here before you. Those who also shivered under straw blankets, who also cooked turnip porridge, who also stitched pouches to hold on to something, anything. The one thing winter can never take, will. You open your eyes to a morning without roosters, without voices, just the wind clawing at the walls and the rustling of the straw blanket, sounding like it's debating whether to shed itself strand by strand or explode all at once. You don't get up quickly. Not because it's warm, but because rising means declaring war on every physical object colder than your body, which is everything. You lift a hand from under the covers. The wind bites immediately. Not violently, not in gusts. Just like a spiteful cat nibbling each finger before slinking away, only to return with a colder, deeper, more invasive touch. Your hands go numb. You look at them like you would at old tools, still functional, but well past their prime. You bring them to your mouth, exhaling slowly, not to warm them, but to see if your breath still has a shape. It does. Thin, white, drifting upward like a sigh forced out from the soul. You crawl out of the blanket, shuffle toward the hearth, or what used to be called a hearth, and is now simply the place where fire once happened. You rummage through the ashes, looking for a surviving coal. Nothing. You dig deeper. A tiny piece, small as your faith in today's meal. You blow. No flame. But ashes leap into the air. You cough like your lungs were just insulted. You boil water, or more accurately, you boil hope. A chipped pot holds some water collected from the roof. Water you're not sure is clean, but certainly is wet. You place it on the stove, feed it a few brittle twigs, the kind even birds reject as nests. You wait, and breathe, and wait. The water begins to heat. You're almost happy. Then you realize you have no tea. Still, you continue. Because sometimes, brewing tea doesn't require tea leaves. Just an excuse to keep your hands busy, to keep your mind focused on the kettle warming, not the world freezing. You grab a chipped ceramic cup, cracked at the lip, fractured at the base, and pour in water that's almost boiling. It fizzes gently, like someone quietly upset. Like you, when you're scolded but too tired to cry. You lift the cup, blow softly, sip. Just hot enough for your lips to know they're alive, and just bland enough for your soul to know it's not tea. You drink anyway, and sit there, in silence, in thin smoke, in light slipping through the cracks like an overdue apology. You warm your hands over the lid, not hot, but warmer than the wind. Your hands redden, then pinken, then go numb. Still, you don't stop. You press them to your cheeks, gently, as if whispering between body parts. Hold on. We're not dying this morning. You look outside. Trees bare, no rain, no snow. No sun either, just that emotionless kind of weather, as if the sky put the whole world on neutral. You hear a clatter, not mice. The ceramic cup, nudging a plate as your hand trembles. A small sound that echoes far, like the house itself reminding you. Careful, even ruins have feelings. You clean up. There's nothing to clean, except a dream diluted into boiled water. You wash the cup with cold water. Your hands sting, but they're clean. You hang the cup on a hook, one side broken, the cup tilted like it's deciding whether to stay or fall just one last time. You sit down, pull out your old notebook, not to write, but to flip through the smudged pages, like trying to rediscover the days that used to mean something. One page reads, "Tomorrow, there will be tea." You chuckle, a dry, quiet sound, not joyful, not sad, just the body's way of reacting to the realization that you once believed it, and today, you're still here. You sew a small pouch, it holds nothing, but you sew it anyway, because your hands need to do something other than tremble, and your mind needs a thread to stitch the scattered pieces of time that fall like ash from the stove. You tuck the pouch into your coat. No one sees it, but you know it's there, between the torn lining and the fabric still holding on. It keeps something, not heat, not tea, but the piece of you that winter hasn't worn away yet. And when the sun rises, not warm, not bright, just present like a distant ember, you stand up, warm your hands once more over the not quite hot lid. Watch the steam rise like the soul of thoughts that never made it into words. You breathe out and think. Today, there is no tea, but there is water. No warmth, but hands. No hope. But still, there is you. You sit a little longer, not because you're thinking, but because your body refuses to move. Like a frozen door, stiff at the hinges, part lazy, part sore, mostly stubborn. Outside, the wind rustles through the straw fence, hissing the sound of resignation. Not strong enough to blow away hope, but strong enough to remind you that hope, too, needs insulation. Like potatoes in a root cellar. You glance down at your feet. Thin, cracked, gray-nailed things that look like they've been walking far too long. They tremble, not from cold, but from memory. A morning with sun. A real cup of tea. A quiet laugh beside you. You can't recall whose. Maybe yours. An older version, not yet traded for turnips, monsoon winds, and promises of just enough. You close your eyes. Imagine real tea, pale golden liquid, steam curling like an unfinished story. And a scent, not vivid, just enough to believe there exists a plant somewhere, grown not to be chewed, not to be stewed, but simply to comfort a person on mornings that lack reasons. You open your eyes. Nothing has changed. The cup is still cracked and cold, but you smile, a crooked, weary, real smile, because you've just brewed something no one else can taste. Hot memory. You stand. The wind bites. Your bones creak. But you walk to the door, crack it open, inhale, moist air, earth, and unwashed time. You turn back. Take a scrap of cloth, tie it around your wrist like a reminder. Today, there is no tea. But there may be a story about making tea without tea. And sometimes, That story is warmer than the cup you hold. You lay down when night arrived like a torn blanket someone threw across the sky, covering your back in darkness and covering your heart in something that closely resembled surrender, but politely so. The house remained unchanged. 3 wooden walls, 1 wall of faith, a thatched roof shedding like a scalp in molting season, and a floor colder than any conversation with a stranger while waiting for salt in the village queue. You pulled the straw blanket up, not for warmth, but to trick your brain into thinking you were trying. The straw rustled, scratching at your skin like a stranger attempting to make small talk through physical contact. Every time you shifted your body, it played a symphony of creaking bones, crackling straw, and the wind sneaking through the wall cracks like the setup to a joke no one ever finished telling. You closed your eyes. Outside, the night was black. Not the black of ink, but the black of exhaustion. A thick, heavy dark, like the sky had given up painting anything at all. The smell inside was a blend of human, damp wood, half-burnt straw, and things you hadn't yet invented names for. Not awful, but not worth sniffing either. You tried to sleep. It was like trying to bake with mud. You had the ingredients, the intention, but lacked something essential, like skill. You lay on your left side, then your right, then back again, wondering, if straw pillows could talk, what would they say? Perhaps, "Please, stuff me with dry grass next time, not tree roots." Or, "I'm not a pillow, I'm a mistake in a sack." The wind kept whistling. You counted each gust like people count clock ticks. If the clock were made of rotting timber and old shoelaces, each gust followed a rhythm. Hiss, whoosh, silence, cold, hiss, whoosh, memory, numb. You wondered, if wind knew how annoying it was, would it be proud? Or was it just trying to live its own life, drifting, bumping into things, but never staying? You heard the wood contract. Not loud, but clear. Like someone sitting down after a long day and softly sighing, "Ugh." But no one was there. Just the ceiling beam shifting silently from the cold. A quiet crack. Then silence. Then another. Like the house was telling stories by aching aloud. And you were the only one awake to listen. You turned to look at your little sibling, curled up like a forgotten potato in the coals, eyes closed, mouth slightly open, breathing steadily. But you knew, not asleep. No one sleeps when it's so cold you pretend you're a log just to feel useful. But they were silent, and that silence, as thin as the skin on a young turnip, was enough to reassure you they weren't crying. You thought about getting up to relight the fire, then thought again, then thought some more, then gave up. There was little wood, lots of wind, and fire. Fire was something that only came last, after everything else had agreed to cooperate. Tonight, nothing was cooperating, not even your willpower. You exhaled. Your breath turned white like mist, rose and dissolved into the ceiling, where at least 3 holes in one former bird's nest waited. You remembered your grandmother's story of the sheepskin blanket, a blanket she never had, but always spoke of, like a collective village dream invented to help people sleep. You lay there, waiting for sleep, like waiting for bread to bake in a fireless oven. And finally, after losing count of how many times the wind tapped your neck or your legs curled and curled again, you began to drift, not quite asleep, but not awake either. A middle state. Like half-baked bread. Limp, soggy, but at least no longer raw. And when the wood gave one final creak, a knock from beneath the bed, like a visitor without a name, you shifted slightly, exhaled one last time before memory faded and thought, there was no fire, no warmth, no tea, no fleece blanket. Nothing to look forward to tomorrow except the fact that I lived. And if you thought the worst was over, congratulations. Your foot just slid off the bed, and in a moment of bitter clarity, you realized your shoes, the only pair you owned, the pair that fit like a polite rejection, were no longer there. Not missing, just wet. Soaked. As soaked as a face towel forgotten under a pig trough. You picked one up, turned it upside down. Water dripped slowly, as if the shoe itself was mourning its destiny. You tried to slip your foot in. It felt like stepping into uncooked dough, cold, limp, and soaked in tragedy. But you did it anyway. Because the outside was waiting, and wind doesn't care about your footwear. It just wants your skin. You pulled on your coat. Not to stay warm, but to keep your dignity. Because nothing is more humiliating than shivering in clothes you patched yourself with twine and hope. You stepped outside. The ground was soft and cold, like advice you never took. The sky hadn't brightened yet, just a pale gray, somewhere between ash and surrender. You walked toward the chicken coop, where there were no chickens, because they were either dead or had fled. But there was a broom. You swept the courtyard like performing a sun-summoning ritual. A stalk of straw floated up, twirled lightly in the wind, and fell like a condolence in a foreign language. You paused, looked around. Nothing. No one. Just you, your wet shoes, and a world that kept wondering why humans persist like this. And you, with all your fatigue, hunger, shivering, and unfinished sleep, simply nodded. Because you knew, survival is not victory. It's a habit. You don't remember how long you slept, just that when you opened your eyes, the light outside had the gray tint of a painting done in cold ash, dishwater, and distilled disappointment aged over 3 rainy seasons. And you, still curled in a position of graceful surrender, were seriously considering that perhaps you could live the rest of your life under this straw blanket, as long as no one asked you to shovel snow, chop wood, or go out for a little fresh air to pinken your cheeks. But then reality called. Specifically, your stomach growled like a frog that had lost its mother. It cut through your philosophical train of thought and yanked you back from the lazy cosmos straight into the hard truth. You had to go outside. You needed water. You needed greens. You needed firewood. You needed to pretend you were fine. You threw off the blanket. The air rushed in like a polite mugger. Not loud, not violent, but very intentional. It immediately found your nape, massaged it with icy claws, and whispered in your ear, "Get up, it's cold, but you won't die. At least not today." You shivered, not because you were scared, but because it was right. You dragged yourself to the door. Yesterday's wet shoes had been left by the stove to dry, meaning now they were merely damp. You put them on, and it felt like slipping your feet into 2 dishcloths that had been wrung once and then abandoned. Every step squished, like the floorboards were protesting your existence in passive-aggressive tones. You opened the door, and the world outside wasn't doing any better. The wind still blew like it never slept. The snow flaked down like flour forgotten during a famine, and the sky was so sullen you wondered if the sun had taken a leave of absence or just quit from sheer burnout. You stepped out. One arm clutched your coat, the other held an empty basket. But you carried it as if it symbolized hope, or at least provided evidence that you had a reason to be outside. Your feet sank into the cold mud, soft as unripe emotions, and you realized, no matter the century, humans still had to trudge through something squishy to reach what they needed. You stopped by the well. The pulley creaked like a grumpy elder being disturbed mid-nap. You dropped the bucket, heard the echo of water like a cold, distant no. Pulled it up. Murky. You hesitated, poured it out, tried again. Better. Less murky. Just a bit gray. You exhaled. Not relief, just acceptance, because there wasn't a better option. You moved onto the garden. Nothing but dry weeds, tiny rocks, and a few turnips pretending to hibernate. You bent down, tried to pull one. Your hands trembled. The turnip was as hard as an unspoken rejection. Still, you didn't give up. You yanked. It resisted. You pulled harder. It came loose, dragging a clump of soil and a worm that stared at you like you'd just evicted it without notice. You apologized, then placed the turnip in the basket. One. Alone. But it was a start. You pulled two more. One plump, one shriveled. Just like two halves of your life. The part you accept and the part you pretend not to notice. You walked home. The wind still pried at your neck like it was testing your defense layers. You chuckled, not from joy, just reflex. Because sometimes, when it's cold enough, you laugh just to keep your teeth from clacking. You reached the house, took off your shoes, sat down, poured water into a pot, set it on the stove, no fire. You lit it, wet coals, you blew, smoke rose, you coughed. Your eyes stung, your hands blackened, the wind howled, but eventually, a flame. Small, shaky, but real. You placed the pot on, and as the water began to boil, you looked at the turnips in your basket as if they were friends returning from a dangerous quest. You prepared to cook, not because you were hungry, but because you were alive. Because in a world where everything might crumble, walls, faith, or the last spoon, making turnip soup was still the simplest way to say, I'm still here. And as the meal neared readiness, the water burbled like someone whispering truths too tired to use words. You sat, cradled your bowl, took a sip, and thought, things are not okay. But at least today, you stepped outside and pretended. You put the bowl down, rested your elbows on your knees, and for the first time today, maybe all week, you let yourself breathe without rushing, without planning, without performing. That breath wasn't warm, fragrant, or memorable, but it was real, like everything else around you. Coarse, cold, worn, but still existing. You wondered, if someone saw you now, sitting in a crooked house like a story nobody bothered to finish, clutching a bowl of turnip soup and staring through a warped window, what would they see? A resilient peasant? A survivalist warrior? Or just a human trying not to fall apart like an overboiled pot? You stood up, took a few steps, then stopped. There was a knock, not at the door, but the knock of time itself, tapping your shoulder, reminding you that tomorrow is coming, still cold, still demanding a new version of yourself, also hungry, also shivering, but still expected to rise as if you weren't exhausted. You nodded, not to anyone, just to yourself. You are sitting in a house as cold as the palm of a weather god who's lost interest in everything, spooning turnip soup like each bite is a boring, overlong TV episode you keep watching because there's nothing else to do. When suddenly your eyes land on an old coat, the one you thought had been used as chicken bedding, or worse, as a rag for scrubbing soot, then forgotten in some damp, moldy corner. It's there, hanging behind the door, silent, demanding nothing, just quietly existing, like a default memory that's been patched and updated. You slowly stand, walking toward it like approaching an old friend you're not sure you're close enough to hug, but too awkward to ignore. Your hand touches the fabric, not soft, not fragrant, and definitely not clean, but unmistakably still a coat. Yours, intact. You try it on. It fits. Not because it's stretched, but because you've shrunk. Shrunken by every hungry season, every light meal, every night curled into yourself to keep the wind from slipping down your neck. And for that reason, it fits. So well it frightens you, like the universe whispering, "Here, wear this again. I can't give you anything new, but at least I didn't take away all the old." Before you can exhale a thank you to the air, you hear a soft creak from under the bed, the familiar sound of wood, or a mouse, or the past slowly pulling open a forgotten drawer. You crouch, brush away straw, and peer into the shadows. Two small eyes look back at you. Not large, not bright, but definitely mouse eyes. You and it stare like two characters suddenly pulled from life's footnotes into the center of a script nobody has finished writing. You don't scream. It doesn't run. For one brief moment, you both agree to say nothing. Then it's gone. As if it only came to remind you, you are not alone. You just share your home with another survivor, one who also gnaws on roots and once considered nesting in an old coat. You look around and see the wooden chest, the one you were sure had been locked for generations, the one you no longer had a key for. But the lid is ajar, just slightly, enough to tempt curiosity, not enough to assure you nothing inside will jump and bite your nose. You approach, open it. Inside is a magnificent mess. A pair of socks long thought missing, a bundle of twine you swear you burned 2 winters ago, a scrap of paper with "Don't forget the onions" written in your own handwriting, but you don't remember writing it, and at the bottom, a small pouch of dried seeds. Not many, but still. You don't know whether to be grateful or horrified. Grateful there's still food. Horrified that your memory leaks like a bucket hauled from the well, only to discover the bottom was just a polite suggestion. You place the seed pouch on the table, staring at it like it's a clue in a crime you committed against your own past, and quietly sigh. You lean on the window. Snow has started falling outside. Not heavily, just enough to cover the thatch roof with a thin white layer, like a dusting of powdered thyme. Each snowflake lands like a late apology, not hurried, not decisive, just gently arriving and vanishing, as if knowing its presence is fleeting, but meaningful. You turn back in, add more wood to the fire. Only 2 sticks left. You choose one, lay it on the flame. The fire crackles like a child given one more spoonful of thin gruel, happy to eat, though it knows hunger will return. You sit and watch shadows dance on the wall, silent figures that resemble you, your mother, all who once lived here, once sat here, once kept the fire alive with things they were too afraid to burn. You open the seed pouch, take out a few, chew slowly. Not delicious, but fragrant. The scent of something that once was warm, once was full, once was enough. A scent not smelled with your nose, but remembered with your bones. The seeds crack in your mouth, like the creak of old floorboards, not noise, but a reminder. Still here, still alive, still edible. You smile, not wide, but real. Then you hear your siblings stir in the straw. You turn, pull an old blanket over them. They don't wake, but their lips curve ever so slightly, perhaps dreaming of something warmer than anything you've seen this entire winter. You watch them for a while, then return to the stove, add more water to the pot, carefully, like making tea. Though you have no leaves, no honey, no sugar, but still, you make it. Because sometimes the only thing left to do is to continue. Now, you remember, the old coat wasn't lost, just sulking. The mouse didn't leave, just in hiding. Faith wasn't gone, just resting under a layer of dust, waiting for you to be free enough to brush it off. And you, staring at your hands, not strong hands anymore, but still capable of holding, lifting, collecting the tiny pieces of a life dropping beneath your feet. Realize that what keeps you alive isn't fire, or turnips, or even memory. It's patience. Patience to let the coat come back after you stop looking. Patience to see a mouse not as a threat, but an unexpected roommate. Patience to wait for a sleeping child's smile. Patience to believe that no matter how much colder, harsher, or more unreasonable tomorrow becomes, you can somehow still smile, still stand, and still boil water without tea. One day you wake up and realize the world no longer needs you to light the fire. No one knocks at the door. No one brings a knife. No one asks, "Can this be fixed?" No footsteps, no gusts of wind carrying the smell of burnt fat from the village's edge. No children running past your smithy dropping the bellows and laughing as if they'd just cracked a piece of the universe. Only silence, the kind of silence soft as ash, neither hot nor cold, not loud, not dense, just clinging to every surface like the dust of a question you never dared to ask. You stand up and walk slowly across the hardened earth floor, not because you're tired, but because the ground has grown used to your heavy steps. And and if you move too quickly, it might mistake you for a ghost. You lay your hand on the anvil, cold, mute, perhaps sad, but it says nothing. You look around. Everything's still where you left it yesterday, or the yesterday before yesterday, or maybe the yesterday of memory itself. The hammer hanging crooked like an idea you once had but never carried out. The rusted tongs like a sentence left unfinished. The forge, cold. The ash, gray. No fire, no sound, no purpose. You wonder, if you lit the fire now, would anyone notice? Would anyone need it? Or would it just be a small ceremony to comfort yourself? A way to say that you are still here, like an old water pump that still drips, though no one drinks, yet hasn't burst. You sit on the brick ledge. Ash falls from your coat hem. You glance at your hands. An old scar. Faint, but it still stings. A quiet pain, like the truth. And then you laugh. Softly. Weary. As if your facial muscles had to convince each other. Smile. Just to remember you're still alive. You return inside. Open the chest. That chest, once filled with tools, old clothes, coarse twine, and dreams folded from wax paper, now holds only a few charcoal crumbs, some rag scraps, a bent coin, and a tiny folded paper like a secret not yet told. You unfold it. A single line. If the fire goes out, don't sigh. Look into the ash. Something might not be done burning. You fold it back. Press it to your chest. Sit in silence, then rise. You go out back to the clay forge built from scraps of stone and generations of stubbornness. You brush off the dust, gather a few pieces of old wood, leftovers from last winter, from the last time someone brought you a broken nail. You light a fire, not to forge, not for anyone to see, but to hear the crackle of flame, the sound of time trying to say something words can't carry. You sit beside it, warm your hands. Look up at the gray sky where clouds drift like souls still undecided on staying or going. You sigh. The fire still burns. Then, footsteps. Light. Unfamiliar, but not threatening. A child, holding a broken knife, face solemn as if carrying the entire universe in need of repair. You look at them. They don't speak. Neither do you. You simply reach out, take the knife, and place it on the anvil. The fire still burns. The wind stirs. Ash dances. You raise the hammer. And for the first time in a long while, the forge makes a sound. Not the clang of metal, but the sound of something returning. The sound of being needed. Now, as the ashes cool, you understand. Not everyone will remember how many horseshoes you forged, how many locks you fixed, how many iron pots you mended for those who forgot to say thank you. But the fire, which remembers nothing and forgets nothing, only needs a reason to burn, and sometimes a reason as small as a broken knife is enough to make the night not silent. You return home when it's dark. Your coat smells of smoke, fingers stained with soot. But your eyes aren't red from fatigue. It's something inside you melting, like frost under the first morning light. You blow out the lamp. Lie down. On the roof, the wind moves gently. In the hearth, embers still hum. Inside your chest, your breath settles, because in the end, you remember, you don't need the forge to shape iron. You need the fire to remember who you once were. Before sleep, you pull the straw blanket to your chin, leaving your feet bare at the edge of the bed like a half-hearted declaration. I haven't surrendered, but I'm not exactly alert either. You drift, then open your eyes again. You rise once more, not for anything in particular, but for a vague feeling in your spine that something needs to be checked. Just once more. You approach the forge. The fire is out, but the ash still glows faintly pink. You poke a stick into the gray remains, stir gently. A flicker of red, like closed eyes suddenly opening from within. You sit, blow gently, a shimmer, thin, like hope on the last day of the year. You don't rekindle it, you just watch. Because sometimes what you need isn't a blaze, but a sign that it isn't over. Then you stand, this time, truly. Return inside, pull the warped wooden door shut, latch it with a cracked branch, lie down, and let your heart, like the small coal in your chest, smolder quietly for one more night. Because maybe tomorrow, someone will knock again. Or maybe not. But you'll light the fire again, just to remember, where the hammer once rang, an echo still lingers, of someone who didn't disappear. Just someone quietly keeping themselves warm with things no one else can see. You didn't wake because of a clock. Winter hadn't invented such luxuries yet, nor because a rooster crowed. The village's only chicken was too busy wondering whether life had any meaning when you existed solely as a lazy man's alarm. No, you woke because a sliver of sunlight slipped through the thatch and landed on your cheek like a polite slap from nature, a reminder that you were still visible. You sat up. The sun wasn't exactly shining. It was more of a sluggish light, weak, pale, and hesitant, like a child halfway through coloring the sky when their pencil broke. You breathed. The air didn't turn white like it did yesterday. Just faint mist, like the soul of a half-baked loaf of bread. And that, by medieval survival standards, meant you were not dying. Not today, at least. You dragged yourself out from under the straw blanket. Every step across the floorboards sang a soft, tired tune. The wood creaked, not to protest, but to say, "I'm still here. Are you?" You opened the door. Outside was a world both ancient and misaligned, where everything still functioned under the rule of, if it isn't entirely broken, it's fine. And you stepped into it like a citizen of just that principle. The wind was light, not cold, but it carried a smell. Dried dung, hearth smoke, drowsy moss, and stories whispered years ago into walls that no one remembered saying. You wandered the yard, picking up sticks, glancing at the patched and unpatched sections of roof, listening to fledgling birds chirp like melodic sighs. Then you stopped behind the house. The wall wasn't special. No paint. Nothing hanging on it except a broken hook and a crack shaped like a map of somewhere no one wanted to explore. But you remembered, standing there as a child, back when you believed that walls remembered what was whispered to them. You'd once told this wall your secrets. You'd stolen a pear. You hated the neighbor. You liked the water carrier who passed by every morning. And you wished for a roof that didn't leak. You reached out and touched the wall. Dry wood. Rough. But still there. You bent down and pulled a weed from the wall's base, as if unlocking a dusty memory box. A small piece of paper fluttered out. Old. Wrinkled. Faded. But the handwriting was unmistakable. Yours, or someone you once were. One sentence. If no one shows up tomorrow, at least you still have me. You folded it, not to hide from others, but to protect yourself from reading it too carefully. You sat down, leaning your back against the wall. Silent, not thinking, not needing to. Just letting your spine remember where your heart once leaned when no one else was listening. Then you laughed. Not from joy, but because you suddenly remembered the time you'd sat here eating porridge so hot it burned your lips, and you yelled at the wall for not warning you. The wind brushed your hair. A piece of straw caught your sleeve. And again, you remembered. Even the things you thought were inanimate might have quietly kept pieces of you didn't know you'd dropped. You stood, walked inside. Each footstep sounded like someone copying your diary into the floorboards. You opened the chest and pulled out the patchwork cloth, good for wiping your face or a bowl, because both were waiting to be cleaned in their own way. You wiped the table. There was no dust, only habit. You tapped the tabletop 3 times. Knock, 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 as if calling yourself. No one answered. You weren't expecting anyone to, because you knew. Sometimes silence isn't emptiness, it's listening. As the day dimmed to a weary shade of honey, you stood in the kitchen slicing an old turnip. You carved it like trimming down the past, just enough to flavor it, not overwhelm, not too bitter, just bland enough to swallow without comment. You dropped the turnip into water, covered the pot, no aroma, no excitement, just soup. But it was soup cooked in a home where the walls listened, the floors remembered your feet, and someone once whispered to themselves on crumpled paper to survive. And if tonight you lie down and hear the beams creaking in a meaningful way, don't be afraid. Maybe that's the sound of your younger self reminding you that someone is still here. And if no one listens to you, lean against the wall, because sometimes walls have more patience than people. You paused, then glanced back at the wall behind the house, where sunset spilled like diluted ink on old parchment. You said nothing, but the wall did. In the wind threading through wood grain, in creaks so subtle only the long lonely could hear. It said, "The story isn't over." You nodded. Didn't promise anything, but the wall understood, because some things don't need promises. Just breath. You stepped slowly toward the kitchen, fetched more wood, rekindled the fire, not for warmth, but for light. You sat beside it, letting the orange-red glow fall over your hands, revealing faint veins, like a map of an unnamed land, where each callus marked a place where you held yourself together. And as night blanketed the house, you curled under your straw blanket, listening to the beams exhale in the dark. You knew you weren't alone anymore. You had the wall, and a piece of paper, and a sentence you'd rewrite tomorrow in onion ink and tuck between stones, so if you forget again, the house will remember for you. Tomorrow, if no one knocks, at least knock on your own heart once. Morning arrived quietly, not with alarms, not with birdsong, but with the gradual absence of darkness, as if light were tapping on your door with a fingertip and politely waiting to be let in. You opened your eyes, slowly. They stung a little, like winter had accidentally sprinkled a pinch of onion into your sleep. You lay still, listening to a faint buzzing, too soft to be truly annoying, yet persistent enough to resist being ignored. The kind of sound you'd mistake for dying embers if you heard it once, but recognize as life trying to broadcast itself into a world too noisy to notice if you've listened long enough. You got up, feet touching the cold floor like stepping onto an unforgiven memory. You made your way to the kitchen, where a bit of ash, a bit of coal, and a bit of yesterday's leftover faith still lingered. You relit the fire, placed the kettle using your left hand, because your right was busy shooing away a fly that had just zipped past your face, with the confidence of someone who had survived 3 failed harvests and a theological debate. That fly, you realized, was no ordinary one. It flew with purpose, as if it had urgent business, a complicated past, or had recently graduated from the National Broom-Dodging Academy. You missed it once, then twice. By the 3rd attempt, you almost respected it. You sat down, eyes landing on the wooden ladle hanging from a nail in the wall. It had been a while. You thought you'd tossed it out, or burned it. Or perhaps it had walked off on its own after too many turnip soup duties. But no, it was still there. Worn, splintered. A small crack on the handle, left over from the time you stirred a pot of oil mid-boil. You remembered, not because it hurt, but because the light scent of scorched wood made the kitchen feel warmer than usual that day. You took it down, held it. It still fit your hand. Still light. The kind of lightness that no longer felt like a tool, but more like an extension of familiarity. You stirred the water with it. The sound of wood tapping against the pot echoed like a memory, of silent meals, of soup too bland to speak, of days when the ladle was the only thing in the kitchen willing to listen. The fly zipped by again. You chuckled, not because it was funny, but because here you were, in a kitchen with cracked walls, holding a wooden ladle, eyes following a noisy creature barely heavier than a grain of rice and contemplating philosophy. You thought about the ladle, It had once been carved from the pear tree behind the house, a tree that lightning split one rainy September 6 years ago. You remembered because you'd hidden under it from a storm, hearing the wind whistle through the branches like someone trying to retell a story you never heard the beginning of. You thought about the first time you used the ladle to cook rice porridge for your little brother. Too much water, not enough rice. But he ate it anyway and said, "This ladle doesn't scrape like the iron one, way better." You thought about the time you argued with your mother. Said nothing, just ladled water into a bowl and placed it in front of her. A silent apology made of steam and wood. You thought of every time you believed you had nothing left, only to find the ladle still there. And the fly. You watched it land on the rim of the pot, rubbing its legs as if preparing to deliver a speech. You didn't swat it. Because now you saw it too was surviving, also wondering what there was to eat today, also sniffing the faint scent of boiled turnips, seeking comfort in a hunger too familiar to name. You took a bowl, ladled water, placed it on the table. No steam, no smell, but warm. You sat down. The fly buzzed once more, then landed on the wooden ladle. You looked at it and whispered, "If you survive today, I'll give you a drop of honey tomorrow, if there's any left." It didn't answer. But if it had, you knew it would say, "Still being alive is enough." You sat there, hand holding ladle, eyes on the fly, mind still as a windless pond, where every sound lingered longer than needed, and every memory returned like it had only stepped out to grab its cloak. You understood something that didn't need to be said. Sometimes, you don't need anything new. You just need to see the old things again. The ladle, the fly, and yourself, still here, still functioning, still not gone. And that was enough to stir another day awake. If tonight you hear something buzzing through the dark, don't panic and swat. It might be a fly, or a thought that lost its way, trying to find the light again from the ladle you forgot you still had. If you've let too many things slip by, don't be sad. The ladle is still there, and it knows how to stir up what you thought had sunk too deep to reach. Before extinguishing the fire, you place the ladle back on the shelf, not because it's done being useful, but because you want it to rest. The same way you let yourself exhale long and slow, as if today had completed its task. Not too hungry, not too cold, not too lost. Your gaze drifts to the kitchen corner, where the honey jar once stood. Now just a hardened crust at the bottom, like a belief never stirred enough. You promise to scrape it tomorrow, not to eat, but to remember that what sticks to the bottom is often the sweetest part. You lie down, hands still smelling of warm wood and a hint of smoke. The fly buzzes softly, like a lullaby without words or rhythm, just the leftover sound of something that refuses to fade. And when you close your eyes, you don't think of the ladle or the fly. You think of yourself, like an old tool, still used, not broken, and still warm enough to stir another day of living. You didn't wake from a dream, nor from a noise, but from a vague feeling in your stomach, like your digestive system had just submitted a formal protest to your brain, objecting to continued survival without any novelty to process. It wasn't exactly hunger. It was something between nostalgia and threat, as if your belly was asking, "Are we eating turnips again?" You sat up, not with the resolve of a hero beginning a new day, but with the grim motivation of someone about to check the expiration date on despair. In the corner of the house, the vegetable basket still sat untouched, a brown-yellow graveyard of once hopeful grocery decisions. You bent down, lifting each root like an old doctor checking the pulse of patients who died the day before yesterday. An onion, so soft you could juice it by blinking. A carrot, dry, curled, and looking like it had gone through a messy divorce lasting 2 winters. A turnip, of course, and something unidentifiable. You couldn't remember its name, only that it once lived in soil, once had a green hue, and now looked like a torn draft God forgot to throw out. You gathered them all, looked at the pile like one might observe an amateur punk band. No one really knew what they were doing, but at least they showed up. You sighed and began peeling, Not to cook, but to see if any part could still legally be called edible without consulting a microscope. After 20 minutes of perseverance and several bouts of self-doubt, you had a plate of chopped vegetables, half food, half incriminating evidence in the culinary court of neglected ingredients. You lit the stove. Today the fire caught quicker than expected, perhaps because the air was dry, or because the universe wanted to help you cook before you changed your mind. The water boiled. You poured in the vegetables. They didn't hiss or sizzle, just a sad plop, like a fish giving up on dance and accepting its role as an appetizer. You sat watching the soup bubble, its surface murky, like all your past relationships, seemingly clear but really not. You stirred with your old wooden ladle, the motion so familiar you began wondering, if this ladle could talk, would it recount all the silent meals you had cooked, then eaten, then quietly forgotten? The soup began to smell, not good, not bad. A neutral scent, as if the vegetables were negotiating amongst themselves to produce a collective odor that wouldn't offend anyone too deeply. You scooped a spoonful, tasted it, first warmth, then blandness, then a slight bitterness. And then, surprisingly, a hint of hope. Not much, but there. Like a lone mint candy dropped into the dishwater, not requested, but not rejected either. You ate in silence. No thoughts, no words. Each spoonful was a question, each swallow, a compromise. It felt like a high-stakes game, where the prize was continued existence, and the punishment was delayed indigestion. Outside, the sky was faintly gray. Not dark, not bright, just the color of damp paper. The wind wasn't strong, but enough to make your door creak occasionally, as if it too needed to exhale or sigh. You finished the bowl, washed the ladle, hung it back, and realized you had survived another meal. Not because of skill or quality ingredients, but because you showed patience for things you once wanted to throw away. You bent down, picked up the last carrot peel left on the table, stared at it. A tiny fragment, easily missed. But you knew it had been the best part of the carrot. You smiled, then dropped it into the stove, to burn with all that once seemed useless. If tonight you lie in bed and hear your stomach rumble, don't panic. It could be pain, or it could be the sound of old vegetables whispering, "We tried our best." If today felt unremarkable, remember the soup. You ate it, and didn't die. And that, as you well know, is an accomplishment. You returned to the corner of the kitchen, where the pot lid sat askew like an unresolved question. You lifted it, stirred once more, not out of necessity, but because something in your heart hadn't quite settled. You scooped another ladleful. This time you didn't eat, just inhaled, a scent halfway between despair and success, like a love letter written in fading ink, sent through winter wind, addressed to someone who can't read. You placed the bowl on the table, looked outside, still gray, not raining but damp. As if the sky itself was simmering a pot of something too, perhaps diluted tears, cooled memories, or broth with no clear origin. You took a spoon and stirred gently. Each circle felt like a tiny journey, beginning with water, passing through vegetables, ending in a quiet truth no one asked for. You lived another day, using things everyone else had given up on. You don't know what you'll eat tomorrow, but today you ate and survived. And sometimes, whether in this century or the 14th, that is all you ever needed to do. That morning you didn't wake up from the cold, nor from hunger, but from a strange scent drifting quietly through the air. Something like damp soil mixed with faded memories. The smell of survival, of things no one asks but still tell themselves through the cracks in the wind. You opened your eyes not because something shook you awake, but because you couldn't not notice the silent presence whispering, "It's time." You stepped out from under the blanket with legs as heavy as if they'd just held a private vote and barely reached the 51% consensus required to move. You walked past the kitchen, still cold as always, where everything deliberately withheld any trace of vitality, like a room deep in meditation that had forgotten it was once a kitchen. You crouched by the familiar basket of vegetables, the only object in the house that served as both pantry and burial site for cooking intentions that died last week. Among shriveled shallots, a carrot broken like early winter emotions, and a few nameless roots, you found it. A potato, small, lopsided, coated in a fine dust like it was faking its death, sprouting 3 long pale shoots that resembled grievances stretched past the boundaries of polite conversation. But it was still a potato. Still intact, still edible, if you were willing to live with a slight sense of danger, like inviting a spider into your soup and asking it not to be a bother. You washed the potato in cool water, as crisp as a blanket hung on the porch during a December night, peeled it with slow care, each thin layer coming off like old burdens you didn't realize you were ready to shed. You sliced it, not evenly, because your hands trembled slightly, not from fatigue, but because something soft stirred in you when you realized you were preparing a humble meal you had almost given up on. The water in the pot began to warm, like a slow conversation between you and the world, with bubbles rising like a shy heartbeat from someone trying love again after years of doubt. You dropped the potato in, not expecting much, just hoping it wouldn't fall apart like the seasonal dreams you once sowed before winter arrived. You stirred with your old wooden ladle, a survivor of leaky rains, slightly burnt and gently warped, but still loyal, still steady, still attached, and your heart quieted. Each circular motion seemed to lull the long-fermented worries tucked away in a part of your brain that lacked the light to clean properly. The scent of cooking potato rose, not quite fragrant, but sure, grounded, the kind of smell a friend might have. Not one who says beautiful things, but one who shows up when you need them, with exactly what you need, no more, no less. You scooped a ladleful into a bowl, let it cool, and tasted it. The first bite was plain, then soft. A faint sweetness came after, and then surprisingly, hope, not much, but just enough. Like a mint candy dropped into a bowl of rinse water, not what anyone asked for, but not entirely unwelcome. You ate in silence, each spoonful a question, each swallow a quiet compromise. It felt like playing a game where the prize was survival and the punishment was a slow stomachache. Outside, the sky was slightly foggy. Not black, not white, just gray, like paper left out in the rain. The wind wasn't strong, but just enough to make your door creak occasionally, like it was sighing, either relief or resignation. You finished your bowl, washed the ladle, hung it back, and realized you had survived another meal, not through skill, not through fine ingredients, but by being patient with the things you once meant to throw away. You picked up the last sliver of carrot peel from the table, looked at it, a small piece no one would notice. But you knew it had been the best part of that carrot. You smiled, and tossed it into the stove, to burn with all the things once considered useless. If tonight your stomach growls like an experimental symphony, don't panic. Maybe it's discomfort. Or maybe it's those vegetables whispering, "We tried our best." If you feel today was uneventful, remember that soup. You ate it, you didn't die, and that, as you know, is an accomplishment. You returned to the kitchen corner, where the pot lid sat ajar like a question left unanswered. You opened it, stirred once more, not out of need, but because something inside you still wasn't settled. You ladled out a little more. This time, you didn't eat it, just smelled it. That halfway scent between despair and accomplishment, like a love letter written in fading ink, sent through monsoon winds to someone who never learned to read. You placed the bowl on the table and looked outside. The sky remained overcast, no rain but damp, as if the heavens themselves were simmering a pot, perhaps of thin tears or cooled memories, or the ambiguous flavor of life. You took a spoon and stirred gently, each circle a miniature journey, starting with water, brushing against vegetables, ending with a truth no one asked for, that you'd lived another day on things others would have passed by. You don't know what you'll eat tomorrow, but today you ate and survived. And sometimes in this century or the 14th, that's all you really need to do. There are days when the weather doesn't need to scream or look threatening. It just stands still, sits silently, and breathes in a way that feels like an old man getting angry with nothing but his eyes. No words, no movements, just a stare that makes the universe feel slightly guilty. That's the kind of northern wind that, with a single touch to your skin, makes you feel as if your spleen has crystallized into snow and is now writing its last will to your liver. You wake up and realize this isn't the kind of day to question the weather. It's the kind of day to accept that you're about to freeze, without the poetic flurries of snow, without any rescue hut waiting nearby. And the only thing that might save you right now isn't faith, nor a cup of hot wine, but that patched blanket curled in the corner of your bed. Once used only to keep piglets warm after a bath, it has now been abruptly promoted to your only companion between survival and a cold that creeps into your intestines like a revenge plot. You pull the blanket out, shake it gently. The fabric is as stiff as the mood of someone forced back to work after a holiday break. They weren't done emotionally processing. The stitches crisscross like battle scars. No one remembers who made them, or when, or whether they were just the result of a long series of desperate repairs by a left hand and blind faith in fate. You wrap yourself in the blanket, not tightly, just enough to create the illusion that something in this world still wants to hold you without asking questions. You walk to the door, peek through the wooden slats. Weak sunlight spills inside like an uninvited guest who sits quietly because they know you're too lonely to turn them away. Outside, there is no rain, no snow, only a stillness so cold it seeps through every crack in the mud wall, slips through every seam of cloth, and knocks on each joint like it's asking, "Hey, still alive in there?" You step back and grab some ragged cloth off a nail. No idea if it used to be a pot rag or the remains of a once dignified shirt, and stuff it into your collar as a final line of defense against the stealthy forces of creeping cold. You sit by the hearth, trying to start a fire, not to cook, but just to keep your hands occupied, because someone once said idle hands lead to irrational thoughts, and you're too cold to find irrationality interesting right now. The smoke rises, not obediently, but rebelliously, curling into your face like a passive-aggressive reminder that even fire can have off days. You sit there, fingers interlocked beneath the blanket, not to pray, but to check if they still have feeling, or if they've silently crossed over to the afterlife. You pour yourself a cup of water, not hot, not cold, just the last neutral fluid left in the house, and drink it like a ritual of survival. Bland, emotionless, but necessary. Outside, the wind howls again, as if it just read your diary and didn't like how the chapter ended. You sigh, then sigh again. Because if you don't, there's nothing left to do. You open a jar of dried beans, not to eat, but to count how many reasons you have left to keep going. You pick out a single bean and stare at it, as if it could answer the day's biggest question. Am I doing this right? It doesn't answer, but somehow you feel understood. The blanket is still wrapped around you like a friend who isn't good with emotions, not soft, not fragrant, not neat, but always there when you need it, and never judging your body odor. You glance around the house. Everything is old but still standing, as if each dented pot, rusted nail, and termite-nibbled plank has sworn a silent oath to hold on just a little longer, at least until you decide to give up. In one corner, a coat hangs quietly. Maybe it used to be your father's, or a friend's, or someone who passed through and left it behind. You don't remember clearly, but every time you see it, you feel like you're still living inside a story that hasn't finished telling itself. If you're still awake tonight, look again at that blanket. Each patch, each protruding stitch, each crooked seam. All of them proof that warmth doesn't come from the fabric, but from the memory of all the times it saved you without needing thanks. And if you feel like you're about to freeze into a block, remember, you're not frozen yet. You're just being preserved for a little more courage, a little more patience, and a little more hope until the sun comes back. Now that you've come with me through every shrieking wind, every patchwork blanket with stitches giving up mid-thread, every silent bean, and all those quiet moments beside a cold hearth, as if your life itself were a pot no one bothered to light. But somehow, still, it warmed. Somehow. With nothing but the soft air of simple existence and the foolish little hope that maybe tomorrow morning the cold will bite just a bit less. And now, as the chronicles of frost slowly close like a pair of tired eyes at the end of a long resistance, you can exhale, long, gentle, and let that breath dissolve into the room like the final warmth clinging to a rusted iron pot. Let the memory of a threadbare blanket fade gently, like a dream you didn't quite remember and don't need to. If you're still awake right now, then you've made it farther than most who gave up halfway because the wind howled too loud or the blanket wasn't thick enough. And if this little corner, this quiet, dusty space, made you feel seen, heard, or at least not freezing alone tonight, then don't hesitate to leave a comment. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is over there. I'm genuinely curious, and also slightly cold, but mostly curious. If you'd like to keep wandering with me through this world of straw dust, wood smoke, and winter-breathed silence, gently tap that subscribe button, like you're pulling an extra quilt over your shoulders. No rush, no fuss, just a soft click. And now, you can close your eyes. The blanket is still there, the wind is still howling outside, but you are here, safe, quiet, warm enough to smile. Sleep well, and I'll see you in the next chapter. Take your time. I'll be waiting.